Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the SKYLIT Books podcast and another episode of SKYLIT, our series of author discussions. Today we have with us Leah Kardos, the author of the 33 1/3 book on Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. Leah is a senior lecturer in music and music technology at Kingston University, London. She is the director of the Visconti studio there. She's a composer and recording artist whose records include Bird Rib and Rococo. She's the author previously of Black Star Theory, The Last Works of David Bowie, and is a frequent contributor to The Wire magazine. All right. Well, thank you for being here, Leah Kardos. I guess, so part of what, I'm a big fan of the 33 1/3 series anyway, but part of what interests me is that I got accepted to write one this year.
Right.
So a little bit of this is me wanting to pick your brain about this process. So we can start, because the listeners aren't all writing 33 1/3. We can start at least with can you explain to the listener what 33 1/3 is?
Yes, it's this really well-known series of little books, each book about one album. And I think it's a little bit more well-known in America than it is over here in the UK, I think. But I've been obsessed with them for a long time. I pitched 3 times before. Well, my third time I pitched, I got it.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so it was like one of those, I don't know, it became my white whale. I just really wanted it. So I was so pleased that I got to do it about Kate Bush, But yes, they're really great because you don't have to be connected or have an agent to pitch. Anybody in the world can pitch. So it feels like an accessible goal if you enjoy music writing. So congratulations, though. What's the album that you're doing?
Well, I realized the series had no comedy, so I pitched Weird Al Yankovic's second album, and that's what got accepted.
That's you.
So, yeah.
Brilliant. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I and also for me, this is like my 4th or 5th time. So I was just like, what is the niche I can fill? So finally they found the niche I could fill. So
persistence.
Yeah, exactly. So what were the other ideas that you tried before?
Yeah, so back in 2014, I pitched David Bowie's Scary Monsters and Super Creeps.
Oh, nice.
I'm a big David Bowie person.
Yeah.
And that was back when the commissioning editor, oh my gosh, I forget her name. She was a little bit more visible and she would give feedback. Oh, and she commissioned a bunch of really strange ones, like sort of, out of the box, non-narrative, really interesting structured books. Oh gosh, I wish I remember her name. But then after that, I pitched Black Star, another David Bowie album.
Yeah.
And that didn't get in, probably because it was way too soon. But that turned into my first monograph, which was Black Star, The Last Works of David Bowie. Black Star Theory, sorry.
Yeah.
And I was really pleased, actually, that I didn't get that one, because to actually expand on the work in an academic way was actually what I needed to do. And then this time around, I pitched Ariel, which is Kate Bush's 2005 double album, sprawling masterpiece, and always been obsessed with that album. And the people at Bloomsbury got back to me and said, "We really like your pitch. We're desperate to do a Kate Bush book, but would you consider pitching either The Dreaming or Hounds of Love?" And I was like, hell yeah, I'll pitch Hounds of Love.
Oh, interesting.
It seemed too obvious to me, that one,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was chuffed because I thought that would be, an obvious choice that loads of people would go for.
Yeah.
I thought I was being clever by pitching Ariel.
Exactly. Well, an
absolute gift to write about.
Yeah, because the Elton John in this series is Blue Moves, which is just like, okay, maybe you have to go a little off center to get the book in, but yeah. So, but yeah, no, Hounds of Love, and I will admit that my experience of Kate Bush is really kind of singles centered. So I wasn't familiar with the album. I definitely didn't know the Ninth Wave. So reading your book was really like a great experience. And I also sometimes when I do read a 33 1/3, I like to listen to the album as well. And so that was kind of a nice experience to sort of, because there is a section where you sort of are breaking it down song by song in a sort of not too theoretical, but music theoretical way, breaking down sort of like the keys and the sort of like harmonic stuff that's going on, and then also obviously the ninth wave is got a almost prog rock story cycle going on. So
Yeah.
but for an inexperienced reader or an inexperienced listener like me, it was really a great read.
Yeah, thank you.
A really obvious question is so what about Hounds of Love spoke to you specifically?
Right. So I found it a little bit tricky to come at it in a fresh way because it's so well known.
Mm-hmm.
It's her most famous album, and it's canonical here in the UK as well. Everybody of a certain age grew up with it, and then it had the big resurgence with the placement of Running Up That Hill, Stranger Things season 4. So it came with a lot of baggage. There were a lot of people who knew this album really well, and that's something that I just wanted to come at it with a freshness, but without trying to force it. So that explains the kind of going back to the music thing. Really, I find, dissecting a song by its lyrics quite boring. What I enjoy looking at is the whole song construction, and actually trying to pull themes out and trying to think about the artistry and the craft of in Kate's case, production and the language of production, and really noticing all the details she embedded in there, and really listening closely. And so that was kind of not that I thought that I could hear it better than anyone else. I just wanted to approach it in a way that I hadn't seen other writers do it. And so that's partly why I kind of do go off a bit on the harmonies, but that's because they're really nicely structured and she wrote them a certain way. And it's part of what makes the listening experience really distinctive. And it's what makes this music compelling, even though you know it so well. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit, but then kind of paint out the picture so that the production choices feed into the composition choices, the lyric, the sonic world building, and the way it's all put together as a cohesive album experience, not just side A and side B, but the whole thing. And so when I figured that that's what I wanted to do, just try and find new ways of listening to old work, then I kind of found my book, so to speak.
Nice. And I completely agree with you, because even, Running Up That Hill, there was that time where it was kind of inescapable. If you're in, I don't listen to the radio that much, but if you're in a public place, you're probably going to hear it, maybe, shortly after Stranger Things. So I felt like I knew that song very well, but last night I realized I'd never seen the music video.
Oh.
So I just on my phone with my headphones in, I watched the music video, and just listening to it, I was like, oh, this production is so much more layered than you can really even quite experience just on speakers. Once you put the headphones in, you're just like, oh, I feel kind of enveloped by the sound of this song. Yeah,
it's true. And
yeah, her work as a producer.
Yes. I think there is something to be said for the elegance of the production. And in particular, I think when you compare this to everything she had done before and her forays into self-production, they'd been quite maximalist and quite sort of throwing everything at it, which I love. But you listen to Running Up That Hill, knowing that she wrote that in 1983 and she demoed it on a Fairlight and a Lindrum with her voice. And she worked on that thing for 2 years. And it really kind of got through the whole process with not much done to it, and that restraint, that elegance, I think she does a little thing and it speaks really loudly, and I really appreciate that with the production of Hounds of Love. It's not minimalist at all. It's actually still quite maximalist, but it's just got so much impact because she's very very intentional with all of the moves she's making, with the sounds she's using, the cohesiveness, the callbacks, the echoes, the use of the same sounds here and there. It draws your attention to the entire world that she's building. And I just love it, and also I just love singing about her being a producer. I just think it's about time we elevate her as one of the best producers, of records, particularly this one in the 80s. So influential.
And again, yeah, I think you're totally right about that, because I never think about that. I think more of her performance aspects, like the music videos I have seen of her dancing, of sort of the visual aspect of that. But yeah, sonically, It's so rich and interesting. Did you attempt to... Is there any part of you that thought, like, maybe I could speak to Kate Bush for this book? Or was it always just sort of like, this is going to be sort of from a listener's point of view? Or
Yeah, I toyed with the idea of making an approach.
mm-hmm.
I had no chance. There's no way. I didn't ask though, but I did sort of have friends of friends that could get me in touch with people in her circle, and I made a few email connections. I got a friend who knew she's got 3 managers apparently. One of her managers to approach them, and as that got closer, as the idea of it perhaps could be possible, I found myself freaking out because I didn't know what I'd want to ask. It's a really strange thing to explain, but like when you look at Kate and the way that she's engaged with people asking her questions about her work, she's always been quite reticent to talk about what the work means or meant to her or what it could mean. She's much happier to talk about the process. Mm. And that's fine. But she's already talked about the process, and she put so much detail into the music. And I ran through scenarios in my head of like, wow, I get an audience with Kate Bush, and I sit down and I say, so what were you thinking about when you decided not to use hi-hats on that track back, in 1985, 40 years ago? What was going through your mind when it's just stupid. And I thought, there's just no way. It's actually really rude to not listen to the work and not hear the detail that's embedded in it and have that answer my question, than to probe the artist about some work from the past when it just, at the time, I just thought there really isn't anything I want to ask her except for one question, which is, how do you feel about the work now? And she's actually popped out of her little cave and spoken about it in the resurgence. So she came out and was talking about how happy she was that people were discovering her work. And, she's re-released the albums with the Baskerville editions and the boxes of Lost at Sea. And I have my answer. So I just found myself thinking, I'm just going to waste this woman's time with annoying questions that actually the answers that I want are in the work itself. So I chickened out of pursuing it. That said, I really don't think I had a chance in hell of ever getting close for an interview with her anyway. So yeah, that's my answer to that. But I think with different artists, perhaps it's different. But with her, she just gave so much detail in the work. It just felt supremely rude for me to ask her to clarify what that meant or how that happened, or,
Yeah.
That's just the vibe I got with that, yeah.
Did you go into the writing with any sort of like presuppositions of what it would end up being, or like certain ideas that you were like, oh, I absolutely need this idea in the book, and then it either stayed or fell away? Like, what was the process of finding the form of this book?
Yeah, that was interesting. Because I came out of Black Star Theory, which really was like a sprawling, map. It was like a cartography of stuff, and I tried to make sense of it. With this one, I kind of started with the same approach. I sort of looked at all of the themes, looked at what was happening, looked at the techniques, looked at her practice, looked at its legacy, looked at all the history, did a survey of all the critical, discussions of it. And I ended up with so many tangents on stuff that wasn't very interesting. I was going down matriarchal folklore. I was going down Jungian metaphors of the ocean. I was going down sea shanties and whaling songs and crazy. And I ended up with so many notes. And what I thought would happen was I'd look at the notes or I'd zoom out and it would become apparent to me what the book was. And it wasn't like that at all. What I had to do is I had to realize that 33,000 words, which is the word count, by the way, which is cute, is not that many words. No. And I need to make a book that will speak to an audience in a shortened form and do justice to the record in terms of helping someone who isn't familiar with the album become oriented in its world and understand it a little bit better. And also for the hardcores, give them something as well. So not just trot out the Wikipedia page and make it into a book, but dig into it and give something critical and fresh. And so with that, I had to decide what my storyline was. And I cut everything else out, and I just told the story of her emergence as a producer, a visionary producer and a recording artist of singular vision. That was the story I wanted to tell. And the fact that she's a woman and she fought for that was part of the storyline. And then I wanted to celebrate the album in detail and really like marinate in it. So I wanted to like do some kind of immersive writing around the listening of the album. And then I wanted to talk about the album as it exists after. So the fact that she performed it live when she's not a live performing artist was interesting to me with Before the Dawn, and then its legacy. And I also wanted to chuck in just a few little teasers into like the kind of tangents that I was going into. So there's like a little drop-in bit about blackbirds, and there's a little drop-in bit that suggests that she's engaging with magical ideas, or there's possibility for magic, and so I didn't get to include all my research, and I think I'm fine with it, because I think in the end I just wanted to show her as a producer and as an artist on par with any of the artists in her category, in her generation. And so that's how I did it. So I really did start out not really knowing what I was doing, and as I realized I had to cut it down into a finer point, that's when the book emerged for me.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, and I do have to say I do really enjoy those little moments, like the blackbird tangent that you referred to, because it comes back on Ariel. Yeah.
Yes, on Ariel, she has Blackbird's song on the front cover, and she sings in a Blackbird tongue on Ariel Tal, and she also lets the Blackbird sing a whole verse of the song Ariel, which is the finale of the whole thing. And then, in the show Before the Dawn, she becomes a blackbird, or she becomes a bird with black feathers anyway, and takes flight. And there, thinking about Hounds of Love is the first time we get her referring to the blackbird, and also crucially referring to herself as a blackbird, help this blackbird, in the context of the witch trial dream that she's having in the ninth wave. And so I thought that I wanted to really dive into that because I thought it was quite rich, and I just couldn't fit it in. So what you get is a little bullet point, little insert in the book, because I wanted it to be there, and I wanted the reader just to have it in mind. In case they wanted to dig a bit more around Kate's catalog, and get to know the artist a bit better.
Was Hounds of Love your entry point for Kate, or were you already quite a fan by the time you'd heard it?
I came at Kate backwards. It's a long story, but I came at pop music quite late as well. I grew up in a church scenario, and I grew up listening to terrible Christian hip hop. Then I studied music at university, and really the whole world opened up to me. And I then discovered, and also I'm in Australia. I was growing up in Australia, and Kate was a video clip artist. I remember seeing her videos. I remember the image of her dancing in her red dress, Wuthering Heights video. But I didn't really get exposed to her albums via my parents. And that's where it would have happened if it would have happened. And my parents weren't fans. And so I came at her backwards. So I sort of loved Ariel and also loved the bits and pieces that I knew, and decided to go back and sort of consume her whole catalog for myself. And Never Forever would be the first album that I really went, oh, I love this artist. She's my artist. And The Dreaming and Hounds of Love, and also The Sensual World. But then Ariel really sort of spoke to me. The older I got, the more middle-aged I got. I think when I reached my 40s, that album was like, oh my God. Particularly during COVID lockdown, I was just this, woman outside in the thrall to, bird song and sunsets and things like this. And wanting to disappear and putting the laundry on and whatever happens, in the first start of the album. So, yeah, I'm a late Kate fan. I didn't grow up with her. But what was interesting to me was, going back and looking at the historical record around the way interviewers treated her in the press, and the way critics wrote about her in their reviews, and even the way she was interviewed by people who I think were meaning well, but always so condescending. There was always this vibe of like, aren't you a clever girl? And oh, you did it all on your own. Isn't that great? Good for you. Oh, you're playing your little Fairlight, CMI instrument. Oh, isn't that cute? And there was so much talk about the way she looked and her movement and her kookiness and her weirdness and her eccentricity. She was always this elven, fairy costume box joke. And it just makes me so sad and angry, going back and doing all of that research. Just, I can't believe it. And there's a really interesting moment where she's on the same show as Peter Gabriel, like weeks apart. And he's on there to promote his record, which is just as weird and kooky and using the Fairlight sampler as hers is. And yet they talk to him seriously and ask him serious questions. And with her, they say, oh, have you ever been to Australia? How do you spell didgeridoo? Oh, do you know how they're made? And just not treating her with the same respect, and boiled my blood, I tell you. And so a little bit of that anger filters into the book as well, the way that they spoke about her and speak about her, actually, even the way that press talked about her 2014 return to stage, Before the Dawn, focused on her body and her looks. And makes me really mad. I've gone off on a tangent, sorry, but
no. But I mean, I think
it
does tie into the book because so much of it is about her sort of becoming like a singular force in the creation of her art and sort of not getting any of the credit for doing that. So I don't think I think that's very tied into what you're talking about in the book. And that is ludicrous because obviously because they collaborated, I do think of her as a similar artist to Peter Gabriel, and it is ludicrous that she would be treated wildly different than him. Like as far as eccentric, pop musicians go, like they're kind of, not cooking with the same pots, but that's not even a metaphor. But you know what I'm saying.
Well, I would say that metaphor kind of works because if you line up Never Forever and Melt, they kind of come out around the same time, and they've got, they are different, but they've got the Fairlight starting to play with sound effects, and then you've got Security and The Dreaming, which are darker and exploring more emotional, range of points of view. And then you have Hounds of Love and So, right? Quite close together. And the commercial breakthrough for both of them, and actually the commercial peak of their careers for both of them. So I think that there is something parallel going on with the artists. And the discourse around them, comparatively, just really does expose some misogynistic stuff in the press, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. And it's also interesting too, now that you mentioned that like it's also sort of at that point that they both start taking their time with albums, like there becomes bigger gaps so that they can focus on getting them right. And that I didn't think of that till just now, but
no, it's true.
I'm just curious for your personal taste, like when you hear the Fairlight. So I'll talk about me. So like when I grew up, it was definitely like I was right in the midst of grunge. It was right in the midst of like just real rock and roll, none of this synth stuff. And so any older stuff that I heard that sort of had like the Fairlight on it, I was kind of like, what is that sound? And I've obviously come to appreciate it since, because you stop being, 13 forever. But like, was it a sound that always appealed to you, or is it something that you came to as well?
Yeah, I bloody love the Fairlight. I love its weird, like 8-bit, crunchy, aliased sound. And it's uncanny, and I think that's the quality that I like. Digital sampling is everywhere now, and it doesn't feel special, but there's something about the Fairlight and its limitations, the 1 second limit, and then you have to kind of do all of this hard work in the background to get it looping, to get it enveloped, to get it working across the board. And it had its onboard sounds, and like some of them are really famous. You could hear it in Frankie Goes to Hollywood or Tears for Fears. You can hear all of those famous 80s Fairlight sounds. But what I like about Peter and Kate and what they were doing is they were Yeah, there's a couple of presets in there, but there's a lot of like uncanny, like recording that male soprano voice in All the Love on the Dreaming, and then triggering it down in the bass range. So it's a boy soprano singing bass, or putting things in strange places so that they're beyond the realms of physical possibility, and it creates this uncanniness in the music, which to me has a magical quality. It creates like anything's possible. It bends the rules of physics, it bends the rule of space-time, and it makes things dreamlike, or it makes things a bit melty and psychedelic, or it makes things unsettling. And I love that dimension in pop music. I really dig that. So I've always enjoyed Fairlight when it's used in that way to make impossible sounds. And I love that. And you can hear a bit of that going on in Hounds of Love in the Ninth Wave, where she'll, I think at the end of Hello Earth, she takes like a whistling wind sound and makes it musical and creates a little melody. And so you have the sound of the ocean, then all of a sudden it's singing. And it doesn't sound real. It sounds fake, but in a way that's connected still to the reality. It's still tethered to the natural world. It's still made from an acoustic source. And I really dig that. I love that a lot. And that whole dimension. And I reckon when digital sampling became the norm, it kind of lost that edge, which is a shame.
Yeah. So wait, at the Visconti studio, I think I was reading, is it a purely analog studio, or what tell me about the Visconti studio. I need to know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We started out wanting to make it analog, potentially, but also as a normal studio. So anyone who wants to work normally needs to work digitally to Pro Tools. So it can do that. But we wanted to also make it so that you could choose to work pure analog, which means tracking to tape and mastering to tape and editing to tape and no computers in sight. And we've done a few sessions like that. It takes a lot of learning. There's a lot of skills that are almost sort of dead. We had to kind of revive and find. We had to get all these like old dudes, from the scene back in the 70s and 80s into the studio. We said, please edit tape. We want to see you do it. And we filmed them. We watched it. And then that's what we teach. So part of it was about making sure that those skills don't die out. And I think they've still got a place in music making. But also, as a person who's interested in the creative practice and what technology gives you, the affordances, like, say I was confronted with a Fairlight right now, what would that instrument inspire me to imagine? And then what would that spark in terms of its capability, and what would it afford me? I'm really interested in that. And certainly when you're working with tape, your brain changes a bit. I don't know how familiar you are with recording, but when you're digitally recording, just like a Word document, you can undo, you can retrieve older things, you can save it as a new file and experiment and go back to your safe version. With tape, you can't do that. If you cut into it, you destroy it. You have to commit. And this idea of having to commit to every decision totally changes the stakes, which again changes the atmosphere of the creativity, which I find interesting. It also actually inserts time. You think that you have more time working with digital, but actually digital makes you make more decisions quicker. You're like, right, we've recorded that. What next? Let's do another one. Let's go again. Let's record some more. With tape, you're like, okay, we've done that take. Let's rewind the tape and listen to it. And let's rewind it again and listen to it again. And now let's practice and edit. So we'll bounce it to another bit of tape and practice the edit to see if that works. Are we happy with that? Are we going to do it? All right. And then with 3 hours have passed and everyone is just chilling and everyone's kind of really thinking about it. And so working with tape gives you time, which I didn't expect. It's cool. And the studio was just for researching and teaching these things. And I guess you want me to explain the name, maybe. The Visconti name.
Sure. I mean, I know what it's about, but for the listeners, certainly.
Yeah. So the producer, the famous New York producer, Tony Visconti, is famous for working with T-Rex, David Bowie in the UK, but also has had an illustrious career working with many legendary artists. He helped us set it up in terms of designing the equipment and stuff that goes in the outboard, and he put his name on the door because we were sort of teaching some of the recording heritage from sort of his era of UK recording, which was the 70s and the early 80s. And in the 80s, he had from the late 70s and early 80s, he had a studio called Good Earth in Soho. And we actually have some of that old equipment. We've got old monitors and things like that. So connecting to that legacy, but also just having Tony there as our kind of mascot for adventurous production. If your listeners don't know, he has a history for sort of being quite bold and experimental with his sounds, but always being commercial with the results. So, he would experiment with eventide harmonizers and backwards tapes and, mucking around with David Bowie and Brian Eno in Berlin, creating weird stuff, but then somehow just creating hits out of it. And so we were inspired by that ethos of, experimentation and bold choices, but also having an uncanny sort of instinct for good music. So we try and sort of uphold that at the studio as well. And he comes and teaches sometimes. He drops in every now and then. But he's our what's the word? Mascot? No, he's our. I was going to say spirit animal, but that's not right either. He's our
right.
Patron saint. Patron saint. There we go.
There we go. I like
he's that.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about that too, because there's descriptions in your book about the sort of lengths that Kate was going to get certain sounds that now, it's just people will look up a digital library and just like plug in. Like, for instance, I have done some recording and with a friend's like digital workstation. And he was just like, oh, yeah, I have this plugin that sounds like the Capitol studio. I have this plugin that sounds like Abbey Road studio. I'm like, probably doesn't really, but it's interesting that someone's just boiled it down to a plugin now.
Yeah. It's something that I think people can take for granted when you listen to music made anytime before the mid-90s or really before the new millennium. All of those details took so much effort. I remember being quite floored listening to the Ninth Wave closely. There's this moment in And Dream of Sheep where she sings about every gull a seeking craft, and she takes some of the orchestration that Michael Kamen did for Hello Earth and she puts it underneath, because it's in the same key. She puts it underneath and she combines it with the sound of a swelling wave, and then she brings it in slowly like it is a cresting wave, and then as soon as it hits the right point of her phrase, she diminishes it with the sound of sea spray and a seagull. And just thinking about that already, that's really complicated. But to do that on analog tape would have been a job. And the amount of editing and splicing and placing things around, it blows my mind. And then it makes sense that she spent a whole year doing the overdubs and the editing and the sound design for these songs. But also, you have to respect the effort that went into making that moment for us, the listener. She really did go cinematic on it. And I really appreciate that. To me, that's really generous, sort of painting with sounds, but in a really quite painstaking way. I love all of that. And you hear that all the way through the Ninth Wave. You hear like sonar blips and whale song and the sound of seagulls and waves and drips and blips, and bless her heart, that would have taken so much time to do. I appreciate it,
Well, yeah, I was going to say, it makes one wonder for a moment if there's like an out of place blip that she's like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back in and try to move that one blip. I couldn't. Are there like many surprises that came from sort of like sitting down and like just giving the album? Like, how many times would you say you listened to the album for the book?
Oh, I listened to it so much. When the Spotify Unwrapped came out that year, I was in the 0.0000005% people in the world who had listened to the album. I think I listened to it like just all the time. And that's not counting the times I was spinning the vinyl. Yeah, I really did marinate in it. But yes, to answer your question, I was open to letting the music tell me stuff I didn't know about it. And certainly I had in my head that there was side A and there was side B, and they were very different worlds. And side A was, a bunch of bangers, except for one song. And then side B was this, quite creepy story that was all connected. And I'd always heard the album that way. And always been vaguely aware that the songs had sort of similar shape. There were these like intervals and the way she sang, there was a kind of vibe across the board. And you'd heard some sounds come here and there, back again. And she also echoed the yo, yo, yeah, yo motif throughout it. And I thought, all right, I think I've got the measure of this. And I sit down with things like Mother Stands for Comfort and just sort of listen to it and what it's saying and what it's doing. You just sort of, all of a sudden, the tissues of connection between all of the themes around family, but also the themes around matriarchy, and also the themes around Mother Nature, and the way that the music then highlights the fragility and strength and caginess of all of that, and also just the unquiet dread of the fairlight and those crash bangs all the way through it, and then how that ties to the themes on the other side. I found that quite a lot, and picking up little threads, little tissues, really opened up the album fresh for me. And I was quite excited. I was like, well, yeah, I can hear it. I can hear what's going on. These things in the production, these things in the lyric, these things in the music are echoes, and they reflect here and here and here. And I was quite excited about that because, again, I thought I knew the album back to front. But I don't think until you sit down to write about it. I think a lot of it comes through the writing. I think you probably know this as well. You sort of think, right, I'm going to sit down and write about cloud busting now, and this is what it's about, and this is what I know, and this is what happens. But then all of a sudden, even in the writing, the research is happening. Even in the writing, I think resonances occur, and you're listening to yourself write as you're listening to the music. And for me, anyway, I found that to be the case. And I would look through what I was written. I was like, oh my gosh, I have written about this before, and I have seen these words pop up before, and comparing notes and triangulating themes and stuff. So for me, actually, just writing it down rather than just experiencing it in my head with my memory, writing it down and listening, and writing it down and listening really opened it up for me. And from there, I could find a lot of connections, which have enriched the album for me going forward. I listen to it in a new way now, and I love it in a new way now.
Yeah, that's the thing that people have been asking me is like, are you ready to get sick of this album? And I was like, well, no, I hope that I come to like it even more. You talk a little
you won't
bit
get sick
about
of it. It'll be a treat.
Yeah,
it'll be a treat. Yeah,
certainly. Yeah, and you talk a little bit about the album design, but when you mentioned cloud busting, it reminded me. So, like I said, I watched the videos from Hounds of Love for the first time last night, and the cloud busting video is so wild. Like Donald
crazy.
Sutherland playing Wilhelm Reich, and like she plays his son, and then I saw it's called the unboxing video for the Baskerville edition, where then there's another little boy who's reflecting from the past on the future of the music video and says she should have worn a Stetson. I'm just like, this is such an odd thing she's weaving together.
I know.
What are your thoughts on like her visuals? Because like, I mean, that's obviously, like I said, it's where I kind of came to her. Like, it's such a part of her as an artist as well.
Yeah. The music videos for Hounds of Love, she directed at least, I know, a couple of them, right? Hounds of Love and The Big Sky. And then kind of went more into being a director, and then obviously made her little, Beyonce's Lemonade, but back in the 90s, The Line, The Cross, and The Curve. And I think she also speaks a lot about the cinematography of the production and how she sees it being quite filmic, and she speaks about the Ninth Wave being a film in her head, and so I think that for her, the visual world and the imaginative liminal world of the songs, and also the virtual world, the stereo world of the production, I think they're all quite linked in detail in her mind anyway, and that's how she spoke about it at the time. And the videos continue the world building, I think, particularly, the ones that she devised. She brings in more film references. I mean, cloud busting is crazy. I mean, I love it. But for me, there's just this tiny awkwardness of the sexual tension between Wilhelm Reich and his son in the video, which you can't get past.
Right.
I find that a bit awkward. But other than that, I think it's great. But yes, the visual element, I think, extends to the mind's eye, the theater of the imagination when you listen to these songs. The cracking thunder of the heart in running up that hill, or the dogs barking or panting with the cellos behind you in Hounds of Love, to the kind of rocking chair clattering of pots and pans of Mother Stands for Comfort. It's all very visual, I think. At least it evokes the mind's eye to create images. And I love that. And that times 100 on the Ninth Wave, is so cinematic. The way she presents that really wants you to imagine and feel and be immersed in this woman's predicament. And yeah, there's that immersion. I think it bleeds through all of that. I'm going to tire myself if I start talking about auteur theory. I don't think it's that important.
Yeah.
But I do think that for her, it's definitely visionary. And I think she sees the whole picture, the whole experience. It's sensual, it's emotional, it's narrative driven, it's haptic, it's all of these things, all of your senses engaged, and the visual stuff comes in with that as well. It was so great seeing her vision for the Ninth Wave at Before the Dawn. I think everybody was like, had the tingles, because they're like, finally we get to see what she saw.
Yeah. And I mean, even just that video that came out of her doing In Dream of Sheep in the water tank, like the shot is so simple, but like that performance is just chilling. Yeah, it's pretty magnetic. Did you have any like major thoughts for the book that you really, really, like, maybe even at the last minute were hoping you could include that had to eventually be cut away for the 33,000 word count?
At the time, it felt like I did, but now you're asking me, and I'm struggling to think of anything that was that important. I did do a lot of research into the world of the album, and I did listen to the B-sides, and I sort of looked at all the different versions of the album that have come out over the years. There was an EMI version in the 90s that had all these B-sides and remixes attached, and there's a whole story about different versions of The Big Sky, and which one ended up on the latest release. And I feel like I want to yawn just thinking about it now. It's just sort of trivia for the hardcores, and delving too much into the story and the provenance of the B-sides, as interesting as they are, I felt it took energy away from the album itself. And I thought anybody who's hungry for more about Hounds of Love, there's more to explore. There are other versions, there are remixes, there's B-sides, which are wonderful. And, if you look at the B-side as it's married to its A-side, that's a whole other thing you can dig into. And I just didn't have enough room in the book to give all of that research the kind of space it needs. And also, I think it would have just made my book annoying and anarchy and just music nerdy in a way that it just wouldn't have been compelling. So I'm kind of glad that all went by the wayside. And I would have been doing a whole chapter about, folk songs and sea shanties, and no one wants that.
That's very fair. I think, and that's appropriate too, for like what the album is what the album is, and what the book is what the book is. I think that's actually a pretty great note to end on. Did you have anything you wanted to plug, or anything? Do you have any forthcoming projects? Obviously, you're still writing for The Wire, which we do stock at SKYLIT Books.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do. I contribute to The Wire. Obviously, I can recommend that magazine, best magazine for underground and under-the-radar music in the world, also jazz and experimental. No, I don't have anything to plug. If your listeners want to continue the vibe, then they should just pull up Hounds of Love and listen to it, or maybe go have a look at YouTube, the videos. I think it's always worth a revisit. It's worth a listen. It's a masterpiece. And she deserves all her flowers. So get those streaming numbers up for Kate.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to check out the book featured in this episode, or others, please visit SKYLITBooks.com. If you're in the Los Angeles area, stop by for one of our live in-person author events. You can find a calendar on our website. If you like this podcast, leave us a review. It really helps us out. Our music is by Duck the Piano Wire. Till next time.